Most people think the Kawasaki Z900RS is just a nostalgia bike with a modern engine slapped on. I used to think that too, but the more time I spent looking into the 2026 Z900RS, the more I realized that's a lazy take, and it misses what this bike is actually doing really well. What surprised me first wasn't the specs, it was the restraint. In 2026, when every manufacturer seems obsessed with bigger screens, more ride modes, and louder styling, Kawasaki didn't overcook this bike, they refined it, and that choice says a lot. I compared the Z900RS to newer retro-styled bikes, especially from Europe, and what stood out was how calm the Kawasaki feels on paper. Not boring, calm. It doesn't try to scream heritage or flex technology, it just blends the two quietly, which I think is intentional. Here's the thing most people miss. The Z900RS isn't chasing retro fans, it's chasing riders who are tired of extremes. Too aggressive, too tech-heavy, too uncomfortable, too expensive. This bike lives in the middle, and that's harder to pull off than it sounds. When I looked closer at the engine, what I noticed wasn't peak power, it was how usable the power band is. Kawasaki tuned this inline-4 to feel friendly instead of frantic. You're not constantly chasing redline, you ride the torque, and that changes the whole personality of the bike. A common mistake people make is comparing the Z900RS directly to the Z900. On paper, that feels logical. In reality, they're built for completely different moods. The Z900 wants to be pushed. The RS wants to be lived with. And that's where the 2026 update quietly shines. Small refinements in throttle response and ride-by-wire tuning matter more here than adding extra horsepower. What surprised me was how Kawasaki seems to understand their audience better than most brands do. Another misconception is that retro bikes are uncomfortable or outdated in ergonomics. The Z900RS doesn't fall into that trap. The riding position is upright without being lazy. The seat height feels approachable without feeling cramped. You can actually ride this thing for hours without needing a chiropractor afterward. I compared it mentally to bikes like the XSR 900 and some modern cafe-styled builds, and this is where the Kawasaki feels more mature. It's less edgy, sure, but also less tiring. And honestly, that's something a lot of riders start valuing more with time. One small detail I really appreciate is the instrument cluster. Analog-style dials with a subtle digital display might sound old school, but they work. You glance down and immediately understand what the bike is doing. No menus, no distractions. Most people don't realize how much that improves real-world riding. Now let's talk about weight, because this is where critics love to complain. Yes, the Z900RS isn't the lightest bike in its class, but when I compared that number to how the bike is actually balanced, the concern faded fast. Weight matters less when it's carried low and predictably. The suspension setup also doesn't get enough credit. It's not track-focused, and that's the point. It absorbs bad roads, stays composed in corners, and doesn't punish you for riding imperfectly. For street riders, that's a win, even if it doesn't look exciting on a spec sheet. Here's a practical takeaway most people overlook. This bike makes sense if you ride often, not occasionally. The Z900RS rewards familiarity. The more time you spend on it, the more natural it feels. That's something flashy bikes rarely offer. I also noticed Kawasaki didn't drastically change the styling for 2026, and I actually respect that. When a design works, you don't need to reinvent it every year. The paint options and subtle finishes do more than a radical redesign ever could. Another mistake riders make is assuming the Z900RS is only for older riders. I don't buy that. This bike feels like a bridge between modern and classic, between aggressive and relaxed, between weekend rides and daily use. Age has nothing to do with that. Compared to hyper-naked bikes, the Z900RS feels emotionally warmer. Compared to pure retro bikes, it feels mechanically confident. That balance is rare, and I think that's why this model has quietly built a loyal following instead of chasing hype. If you're the kind of rider who cares more about how a bike feels after 50 miles than how it looks on Instagram, this bike makes a lot of sense. Most people don't realize that until they've owned something louder and more demanding. So here's my honest take. The 2026 Kawasaki Z900RS isn't trying to impress you in the first 5 minutes. It's trying to earn your trust over years. And in a motorcycle world obsessed with instant wow factor, that might be its most underrated strength.